Look, before you hit play on this audio, I need to give you a massive warning. This whole thing, it's based on actual, real-life events. I know a huge chunk of you guys are going to call BS on this, because let's face it, most people are total skeptics when it comes to stuff like this. And honestly, I'd be doubting it myself if I hadn't been right there in the dead center of that absolute, bone-chilling nightmare that night. But let's take it one step at a time from the very beginning. For years, my life was anything but boring. I spent a hell of a lot of time dragging myself through all kinds of abandoned ruins, constantly looking for trouble and chasing that sweet adrenaline rush. I've been everywhere, from flooded underground bunkers and top-secret testing labs to entire ghost military towns. Usually, we'd roll out as a tight crew of 6. We all hooked up on some exploration forum at an old facility site, and while I can't say I was super close with those guys, we shared the exact same obsession. It was just a blast hitting those eerie, decaying spots together. Well, up until that one cursed day. I was sitting at my desk, absolutely dying of boredom during another soul-crushing gray workday, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Tyler. He was our de facto leader, the guy running our little band of urban explorers. Honestly, he was always the trigger man for every single crazy trip we took into those ghostly, alluring ruins. So, Tyler drops the date, the time, and the spot for our next run, and just like that, my shoddy mood completely vanished. I opened up the email attachment and started staring at the pictures of the place our fearless leader had his eyes on. It was the notorious Kings Park Psychiatric Center out on Long Island, New York. Specifically, Building 93. A monolithic, 13-story concrete fortress of pure madness swallowed by overgrown woods and heavy coastal fog. Right next to the main building stood a smaller, separate block that the locals called the old autopsy morgue. The sheer scale of the whole property was insane, something like 1 million square meters of decaying wards and asylum corridors. We'd never hit a facility that massive before, so I spent the entire rest of my shift glued to the screen, digging through old forms and obscure Wikipedia pages about this creepy place. And man, what I dug up was wild. First off, the place was technically heavily patrolled, but according to kids who'd been there, the security was just a bunch of friendly old local hillbillies who spent their entire shift getting completely flattened on cheap bourbon inside their heated shack near the main road. That definitely played right into our hands. Second, the complex had a brutal, blood-soaked history. Back in the 90s, after the asylum closed, it became a regular hotspot for violent crimes. Aside from armed muggings, there were a couple of straight-up grisly murders. In '94, a young girl was brutally butchered inside one of the wards, and back in 2015, some hikers found a man tied up and hanging from a rusted beam on the upper floors. But the real kicker was from 1989, right before the facility started shutting down. Rumor had it that a full-blown occult sect called the Order of the Bleak Heather set up shop in the pitch-black, unfinished basements, practicing dark masses, curses, and bloody sacrifices. They mutilated animals and slaughtered people in the most twisted, sickening ways possible, and they weren't even above a bit of cannibalism. The local legends said the state police eventually raided the place with a heavy tactical unit, shooting the young cultists on sight and blowing the basement entrances sky high. The lower levels were completely flooded with water afterward, which totally killed any appetite for normal thrill seekers to go down and test if the rumors were true. No doubt about it, those creepypastas only pumped my excitement for this eerie, twisted maze even more. Plus, the complex was sitting right on the outer edges of town, so getting there was a breeze. The decision was an absolute no-brainer. I spent a whole agonizing week waiting for the weekend trip, and for some weird reason, I got incredibly serious about preparing for it. Usually, I hate packing a ton of crap that just slows you down when you're climbing, but this time, something in my gut forced me to overpack. I stuffed my canvas tactical pack with all sorts of gear, a heavy-duty rope with a locking carabiner, a small folding pocket knife, a basic first aid kit just in case, and of course 2 high-intensity mag lights with a massive stash of extra batteries. The whole run promised to be sketchy as hell, and it wasn't because of the cultists, psycho-drifters, or any other fictional characters, as I thought back then. No, the real issue was that Building 93 was a total structural hazard. The concrete was actively rotting, and ceilings were known to collapse right onto people's heads. Not long ago, some kid stepped on a weak concrete slab, fell 2 whole stories down through the floorboards, and miraculously walked away with just massive bruises and fractures instead of leaving in a body bag. Finally, Day X arrived. I was practically bursting with anticipation, sitting on my packed bags and waiting for Tyler to call and give us the final rendezvous spot for the crew. There's no real point in detailing how we got out there, except for one weird thing I noticed. Every single guy in the truck, besides Tyler, was sweating bullets. They looked like they were driving straight to a lethal injection, not going out to mess around in some cool abandoned ruins. I didn't want to dig into why a bunch of seasoned explorers were suddenly losing their nerves, so we rode the entire way to the complex in dead, heavy silence, only tossing out a few random questions just to keep up appearances. The target was sitting right next to an old, abandoned commuter train platform, literally a 5-minute walk. The second we hit the tracks, we could see the grim, deeply mystical beauty of the place everyone called Building 93. Our group crept up to the heavy chain-link fence topped with rusted barbed wire, scanning it to find a fresh hole. Urban explorers hit this place all the time, so the guards frequently patched the wire, which apparently drove them completely insane on a regular basis. Anyway, after about 10 minutes of scouting the perimeter, Tyler pointed out that the guard shack was located strictly by the main entrance road. For a massive complex like this, you'd need at least 2 or 3 security posts to actually lock the place down and catch trespassers. This was a massive win for us, and basically proved all those online reviews about the lazy local guards were 100% on the money. Pretty soon, we found a tight gap in the fence somewhere near the half-built autopsy block. We quietly wriggled through one by one, making damn sure we didn't disturb the peaceful slumber of the local law enforcement. The moment we stepped inside the actual facility, the view was absolutely breathtaking. We immediately felt like we were part of this dark, mystery-soaked monolith, and man, it gave all of us a massive, intoxicating rush of pure satisfaction. Our extreme itinerary had a few specific must-see spots on the property. First up was the memorial for that young kid who jumped straight down an open elevator shaft because of some brutal unrequited love. The poor teenager was barely 16 when he decided to end it all, and his makeshift shrine was sitting on the 2nd floor of one of the wings. Then there was the Order of the Bleak Heather, that legendary satanic cult whose sigils and graffiti were spray-painted all over the main building's basement. It still draws a ton of curious thrill-seekers, even though every single member is either long dead or probably never existed in the first place. And of course, we had to see the famous warning painted across the main lobby wall. Welcome to the Hive. Enter a man. Leave a ghost. We had about 5 hours tops for the whole run. The guys had zero desire to wander around an incredibly hazardous, guarded maze in pitch-black darkness, and honestly, you couldn't blame them. As we navigated the deep concrete corridors, we listened closely to the heavy, tomb-like silence echoing around us. Meanwhile, Tyler was doing his absolute best to mindfuck the already terrified crew, whispering all these grim stories about cultists who were supposedly still lurking in the shadows of this haunted wreck, waiting for fresh meat. I just laughed my ass off at them, thinking they were incredibly naive for swallowing all these fairy tales about occultists, monsters, and boogeymen. I'd always been a hard realist. If I don't see it with my own two eyes, it doesn't exist. Well, that exact fateful night completely cured me of my realism. I was forced to believe in every single bit of the supernatural when I ran face first into the most unspeakable, mind-shattering horror you could ever imagine in this insane world. But back then, we were just drifting from room to room, checking out the layers of fresh and faded graffiti on the brick walls. We managed to hit every single landmark before the sun even started to dip. Tyler suggested we light a small fire in a secluded day room up on the 6th floor so we could chill out after a rough climb. Instead of standard, boring canned food, we decided to break out some military surplus MRS, the genuine tactical rations. They're a massive trend among stalkers right now, and Tyler and I had spent weeks tracking down some rare military lots. We spent a good 10 minutes messing around with the chemical flameless ration heaters, filling the little plastic sleeves with water and watching them steam up. The whole room smelled like processed beef stew and hot plastic. It was awesome. Sitting around that fire, eating our rations out of those tan plastic pouches, it was mostly me and Tyler doing all the talking, swapping crazy legends about Building 93, or the Umbrella, as people love to call it. The nickname stuck because if you looked at the building from a satellite view or a Google Earth map, the architectural layout of the massive radiating wings looked exactly like a giant biohazard symbol. Honestly, the number of urban myths tied to this place was endless, and it created this incredibly thick, eerie atmosphere that gripped everyone present. That specific vibe is exactly why any real explorer packs up and hits the road in the first place. But then, twilight started creeping in. The whole surrounding forest began taking on a deeply unsettling, terrifying shade of dark, and this cold dread slowly started bleeding into the room, wrapping itself tightly around everyone's subconscious. It was definitely time to pack up our camp and head back to the train tracks. The commuter trains ran pretty infrequently out here, and sitting around a freezing, exposed platform in the middle of nowhere is a shitty way to spend an evening, which is exactly what I told the rest of the crew. Just as the guys were grabbing their packs and getting ready to move out, Tyler suddenly blocked the doorway and pitched something completely out of his mind. He wanted us to spend the entire night right here, inside this pitch-black, sinister maze. Looking back, I realize it wasn't just a reckless whim. There was an unsettling, unnatural edge to his voice, like a deep mental pull or a blind obsession forcing him to stay right at the heart of this building. Naturally, the guys instantly shot the idea down. First off, sleeping at a dangerous structural wreck is just plain stupid. Second, there was a massive chance of getting cornered by hostile drifters or thieves, who, by the way, were a regular fixture at the property. And third, all those disturbing legends, topped off with the creepy stories Tyler and I had been feeding them all day, were majorly screwing with their heads. Long story short, every single guy completely backed out of this idiotic stunt. Tyler immediately snapped, calling them a bunch of soft, spineless cowards. He told them that if nobody had the balls to test their manhood, he was going to stay right here through the night completely by himself. No matter how long or hard the guys tried to talk our stubborn leader out of it, he flat out refused to listen, just sneering and mocking our lack of guts. In that exact moment, I figured that leaving Tyler entirely on his own in a treacherous, dark labyrinth like this was just too dangerous, and frankly, it felt wrong to ditch a buddy. So, against my better judgment, I told the guys I'd stay behind with him. Man, over the next few hours, I ended up regretting that choice 1,000 times over. By the time we got the fire going again and cleared out a couple of flat spots on the floor for our sleeping bags, complete darkness had swallowed the building. The decaying concrete walls took on an even more menacing, hopeless look. I'm not going to lie. I was feeling incredibly exposed. During the day, I was laughing at the guys for falling for Tyler's ghost stories, but now, sitting here practically defenseless in the dead of night, we were incredibly easy targets. If it wasn't cultists, we were sitting ducks for violent, desperate vagrants whose nasty encampments we'd literally seen just a couple of floors below us. Plus, packs of aggressive feral dogs loved to roam these woods at night. I looked down at my small folding pocket knife, and a cold sweat hit me. It felt like an absolute joke, a useless toy against any real threat out here. I cursed myself 100 times for not sneaking a proper defensive piece into my tactical pack. I straight up asked Tyler what the hell possessed him to suddenly camp out in a sketchy dump like this. He just stared into the flames, acting like a total purist.
A real explorer doesn't sweat basic dangers, Ethan. He doesn't chase the cheap, comfortable garbage that normal society is obsessed with. A real tracker can build a camp anywhere, sleep through the storm, and keep moving forward to see what the world actually looks like when the lights go out.
I don't remember exactly how long we sat there jawing back and forth, but by the time my eyes started getting heavy, it was deep into the night. I told Tyler we needed to set up an army-style watch rotation to guard the camp while the other guy slept, just like you see in tactical military movies. The threat out there was completely real, and getting caught sleeping was the last thing I wanted. So, we agreed that I'd catch some Z's until 3 a.m. while he watched the corridor, and then we'd swap out so I could pull guard duty until dawn. Finally, I wrapped my jacket tightly around my shoulders, stared at the dancing orange flames of the fire, and let exhaustion pull me straight into a deep sleep. I have no idea what I was dreaming about back then, but the rest didn't last long at all. Out of nowhere, I was violently jolted awake by an absolute, blood-curdling, agonizing shriek from my partner. It sounded like he was somewhere pretty close by. In a split second, I ripped my maglite out of my pack, flipped open my knife, and bolted straight toward those horrific sounds. Illuminating the pitch-black corridors with my beam, I ran like a maniac, desperately trying to map out my position in the maze on the fly. I was running out of time. Tyler's screaming had completely cut off, fading into a sickening silence. Whatever was happening to him, I knew I had to get him out. Did I know back then that the smartest move was to instantly sprint out of that cursed place and never look back? Of course I did. But I didn't listen to my gut, and predictably, I ran straight into the jaws of total ruin. I burst into another massive hallway and suddenly caught a heavy, dragging sound coming from a dark doorway leading into the old hydrotherapy wing. I immediately cut my run down to a slow crawl and clicked off my flashlight so I wouldn't give away my position. I started creeping toward the noise in absolute silence, knowing damn well that whoever, or whatever, had jumped. My partner was standing right on the other side of that brick wall. I needed a place to hide and assess the situation, so I lunged around a sharp corner, dove into a tiny windowless janitor's closet, and pulled the door shut. I dropped it to my haunches, trying to force my frantic, sobbing breaths to go completely silent. My heart was pounding so hard against my ribs, I thought it was going to burst right through my chest. After a few agonizing seconds, the heavy, rapid, pounding footsteps of the pursuers stopped dead in their tracks, literally 5 feet away from my door. They had lost the trail. I sat there frozen, a thick, suffocating wave of pure terror bleeding into every single cell of my body, making me shake like a leaf. Then, the tomb-like silence was broken by a horrifying sound. From the outside corridor, a low, rapid whisper began chanting some twisted prayer or hex in a totally unrecognizable ancient language. And then, the door handle began to turn. Slowly, completely backward. Someone was opening the closet door from the outside. My mind snapped. As the door swung open, revealing a shadow in the dim light, I raised my mag light and clicked it on high power. I froze in pure, unadulterated horror. The beam hit the masked face of a cultist stepping into the room. He was dressed in a filthy, yellowed asylum gown and a heavy rubber surgical apron, ancient medical gear looted right out of the building's abandoned operating rooms, all covered in dark, faded stains. His face was completely wrapped in thick, yellowed gauze and an encrusted surgical mask that hid everything except his eyes. Above the mask, on his exposed forehead, I could see deep, jagged, ancient markings shaped like twisted stitches. He crouched down, his blood-stained apron scraping against the floor, staring at me with a sick, chilling animal curiosity. I tried to strike, but a heavy blow from a second figure in the doorway cracked against the back of my skull. Everything went black, and I collapsed onto the freezing concrete floor. I was dragged back to consciousness by those exact same agonizing screams from Tyler. He was lying right next to me in what looked like a deep, flooded basement vault. My hands and feet were wrapped in thick, professional hemp rope, and my head was pounding so hard I could barely see straight. They must have cracked me with a pipe or something, because by my count, I'd been completely out cold for several hours. The entire vault was illuminated by dozens of thick, black tallow candles heavily arranged around a massive, fresh pentagram painted in dark blood right on the floor. Tyler was lying flat in the dead center of that circle, thrashing around and muffled, screaming in total, desperate terror. Looking at the concrete walls, I noticed all sorts of fresh, wet symbols and sigils painted everywhere. One specific piece of graffiti caught my eye. It was the exact insignia of the Order of the Bleak Heather. I needed to break out right that second because my entire gut was screaming that something unspeakably foul was about to go down. But no matter how hard I strained against the bonds or tried to snap the hemp, the knots didn't give an inch. I started desperately crawling toward the dark exit, but as if on cue, the heavy doors swung open and those masked figures started filing into the room. In their hands, they were gripping long, curved ceremonial daggers that looked like full-blown short swords. This was the absolute end of my life story, a lonely, horrific death in a forgotten basement that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. But we had to play the hand we were dealt. The cultists, I counted about 9 of them total, all in those disgusting, blood-soaked surgical aprons, formed a tight ring around the blood pentagram. Holding their daggers high with both hands, they started chanting in perfect booming unison in that heavy, ancient tongue. Tyler had a thick rag stuffed deep into his mouth, his eyes bulging out of his skull in pure terror as he rolled around inside the circle, desperately begging for his life with his eyes. Nobody paid him any attention except me. The chanting reached a deafening crescendo, then stopped. Instantly, the leader stepped forward. He looked down at Tyler. He barked out a single guttural word. A name. A name that didn't belong to any language spoken on this earth. It was the ultimate catalyst. He leaned down and drew the blade across Tyler's throat. The blood didn't just drip. It geysered, a dark, hot spray that coated the candles, the floor, the surgical gowns of the cultists. I screamed, but the sound was choked by my own tears. I closed my eyes, sobbing, listening to the horrific, bubbling, suffocating death rattles of my buddy choking on his own blood. And those heartless bastards just stood over him in absolute silence, as if they were waiting for a show. What happened next? I still can't logically process. My mind tries to reject it every single day, forcing me to relive those twisted minutes over and over, asking myself the exact same question. How is that even possible? Tyler, whose throat was completely ripped open and who should have been a dead corpse, suddenly snapped his eyes wide open. By cutting down their key target, the cult had shattered the final containment parameters. The living anchor was dead, and a catastrophic Phase 3 breach tore through the room. He didn't just move. He stood straight up in a single, violent, unnatural leap, scanning the room like an apex predator locking eyes on its prey. And then, a literal, blood-soaked slaughterhouse opened up, triggering the nightmares that still hunt me to this day. The entity, the thing that took complete control over Tyler's body, started tearing those cultists apart with this sickening, casual brutality, leaving absolutely zero chance for anyone to make it out alive. It was my one and only window to survive, and I wasn't going to blow it. I dragged myself over to a curved dagger that had dropped right next to the severed arm of one of the cultists. I grabbed the cold steel and started sawing frantically at the hemp around my wrists, forcing myself to look away from the horrific sounds of crushing bones and ripping flesh happening right behind my back. The ropes finally snapped. I sliced through the bonds on my legs, stood up, and was ready to sprint for the stairs, but some morbid, terrible instinct made me turn around. Holding the heavy dagger out in front of me, I looked back. The vault was dead silent now. Everyone was butchered, except for him. The creature was crouching over a pile of raw meat, its entire face drenched in deep crimson. It locked its solid, glossy black eyes straight on me, a jagged, inhuman grin splitting its bloody jaw. It sprang. I didn't think. I just raised that heavy, sacrificial blade with both hands, locked my elbows, and braced for the impact as it threw its entire bloody weight onto me. The impact slammed me hard onto the cold concrete, knocking every bit of oxygen right out of my lungs. The monster was pinning me down, but it suddenly stopped moving, freezing right over my face. I looked up. That long, curved dagger had gone straight through its chest cavity, piercing its dead, black heart. The glossy film over its eyes slowly dissolved away, and for a fraction of a second, I saw Tyler looking back at me, shocked, erased, and then the last spark of life left him for good, and his heavy corpse slumped onto my chest.
They intercepted me before I even made it to the main road. It wasn't the local police or a standard rescue team. A tactical containment unit in unmarked matte black armor swept the facility, locking down Building 93 within minutes. They dragged me into an armored transport, subjected me to days of aggressive medical screening, and forced chemical amnestics into my system. The entire lower levels of the asylum were permanently sealed with tons of solid concrete under the cover story of an emergency hazard demolition. They think they buried the incident. They relocated me across the country, gave me a sterile new life, and left me out here under their passive, silent surveillance. I know they are listening to me right now. But the sweep wasn't perfect. Every single time the heavy fog rolls over the hills, every time the room turns freezing cold, I see those solid, hollow black eyes staring back at me from the dark. And I know that horror cannot be contained by simple concrete.
Official report of the Somnia Bureau. Case closure date, May 30th, 2021. Reporting officer, Agent 5-1. Security clearance, Level 3. Protocol, The Hive. Section 1. Nature of the object and threat. Subject. Tyler is classified as a passive anchor of the 4th resonance level. Investigation confirms that Building 93 of the Kings Park Psychiatric Center acted as an active resonator for the Hive, an inorganic form of consciousness from the lower planes of reality seeking physical manifestation. Subject Tyler unconsciously resonated with the anomaly since early childhood. His fixation on the facility and the gathering of the exploration group were entirely dictated by the will of the Hive. The malice developed inside the subject, systematically altering his neural pathways to match the anomaly's frequency for subsequent utilization as a biological vessel. Section 2. Operation Results and Containment Measures. During the ritual execution of Tyler by the cult, a Phase 3 breach occurred. The reality stability ratio dropped to 0%. The ancient entity instantly occupied the biological shell of the deceased anchor, initiating the forceful liquidation of all biological targets within the perimeter. The Order of the Bleak Heather cult has been entirely eliminated. Further escalation was halted by witness Ethan, who pierced the monster's heart with a ritual blade, severing the hive's link to the anchor. Witness Ethan was detained at the perimeter. The subject was subjected to deep amnestic procedures of the Omega class. Side effects are absent. Memory of the incident is fully blocked. There are no risks of compromise. The audio recording has been seized and archived. In accordance with protocol, the hive, the underground levels of Building 93 have been sealed with 4,200 tons of specialized lead concrete composite. The reality stability ratio is restored to 100%. Subject Ethan has been placed under passive surveillance in the Oregon sector. Case status: closed and sealed. Reproduction of this file is strictly prohibited. End of report.